Okay. All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michael Schwartz with Gun Owners Radio, and this is attorney John Dillon. And John Dillon has been a supporter of San Diego County Gun Owners and Gun Owners Radio for forever. You probably know him. He's the attorney for the Miller versus Bonta case, and you've heard him on Gun Owners Radio, and he's a fantastic Second Amendment attorney and a great guy. So today we're having John on to talk about, we're actually going to have a conversation about how to talk to activists. This was John's idea. He wanted to really have a conversation on how to talk to activists, how to talk to other people about the Second Amendment, rather than just preach or give your opinion. We want to try to give you tools and talk about how to be effective at influencing their opinion. So, John, I'm going to turn it over. Was that a good intro, or how would you describe what we want to accomplish today?
Yeah, I think that was perfect. I would say in my line of work, in your line of work, oftentimes you run into the problem of being kind of preachy about your stance, and that's with any political stance of any kind. When someone gets really involved in it, you kind of fall to the cliches or the debate topics that you see either online or just in interpersonal relationships and all that. And I think that sometimes we just fail to really actually captivate the person you're talking to, and really bring them along with you. And I think one of the biggest things with what we do is not only are we trying to prove and to people that Second Amendment is something that is sacred, it needs to be protected in every way, but we want to bring the other side over to us. It's not like a war where we're going to go beat them up and hopefully we're the only ones left standing. This is a game of convincing the other side of your position. And I think too often we just kind of fall apart when you actually get face to face with someone. Frankly, I'm a huge anti-internet debater in the sense that I tell my wife all the time, never get into a debate online. You will never end it. It'll continue on forevermore. You're never going to convince anyone. So stay away from that. But, in your real relationships with your family, your friends, coworkers, even acquaintances, or if you're being a Second Amendment advocate and you're talking to people in more of the political sphere, you want to be effective in what you're doing and not just say the usual tropes and fall, the one-liners, but you want to be effective in captivating what the audience you're talking to. And one of the main things way of doing that is really paying attention. Well, who am I talking to? And identifying the situation you're in. So, I split this into the two categories when you're talking about the gun debate. There's the constitutional debate, and then there's the policy debate. The constitutional debate, in my mind at least, is very simple. We have the Second Amendment. Everyone knows what it says. We have a Supreme Court precedent who's made it very clear, despite what some lower courts try to argue, is that we have the individual right to keep and bear arms, and that is all weapons of offense or defense, and that's the end of the story. That's the constitutional argument. We have that right. No other country in the world has that right. Nothing even close to what we have. Despite the fact that other countries, in some areas, allow people to have arms, the thing that separates us is we have the right. So it's not up to the government. We always gloss over this fact when we talk about constitutional rights or the Bill of Rights. Is they're negative rights, which means that they are a list of things that the government is not allowed to do. It's not a list of things that the government has given us and provided for us and said, oh, well, you're a good boy, so you can have these things. The Bill of Rights is a giant list of regulations on the government, not of the people. So I think the constitutional argument, that's the one we have in the courts. That's pretty straightforward. And, I think, especially now with, the recent Supreme Court decisions, like New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, that debate, we're in a battle still, and it's going to go on for a little while. but we've locked that in the sense of that the law, history, and constitution is on our side, and we don't need to twist words or twist history to have that be the case. But the thing is, when you're talking to people and when you're trying to talk about the Second Amendment right and right to keep and bear arms with your friends and family, coworkers, all that, you're not doing the constitutional argument. You're doing policy arguments. Everyone's arguing about policies and what are policies. It's just people's opinions and their emotions. So you have to approach it differently than if you were going to do a constitutional argument.
Which I
And
think I think the emotions part is one of the biggest differences in the two conversations.
oh yeah, and you know emotions will gloss over reality and logical thinking so easily, and they're so powerful that you got to know when you're having a policy or an emotional conversation versus a constitutional law conversation when it comes to the Second Amendment. And like I said, most of the time when you're talking to people, you're going to be having that emotional argument, that policy argument. So that's the first order of business, is knowing who your audience is and what conversation you're having. Because too often, and I call these like the pro gun cliches, you get you know, AR-15 doesn't stand for assault weapon, it's Armalite rifle. And then you hear shall not be infringed over and over again. Now, I agree with both of those things. They're not wrong at all. But that's not going to win anyone over who's not already on your side. Everyone's read, or most people have read the Second Amendment. They've seen the words and the language shall not be infringed. You know, uh, with AR-15 armor rifle, it's all over the place. The information is out there. So saying those type of things or falling back on those kind of cliches, they're not. It's not going to convince anyone. But what will convince someone is really understanding who you're talking to and approaching it in, a more approachable way in that sense. So, one of the big things I always do is when I'm trying to talk to someone, uh, about Second Amendment, and it can be random conversations with strangers. You know, I, there was a time where I was on a chairlift snowboarding, and I have a Firearms Policy Coalition sticker on a snowboard. And the guy next to me was like, "What's that?" It's big, AR-15 FPC logo on my board. And the guy was like, "What's that?" And so on this chairlift, I get to tell this random stranger that, "Oh, that's the Firearms Policy Coalition. It's a client of mine. I'm a Second Amendment attorney, and I work on gun rights." And then the guy immediately, "Oh yeah, I hate guns. Guns are bad." And so right then and there, I know I'm not having a legal discussion with someone. I'm not in front of a court. This is a guy whose opinion and emotions is guns are bad and guns are scary. So I got to approach it in a way where I'm going to show him that, hey, guns can be a sense of security, and they are, in fact, for a lot of people. And, one of the ways I like to bring people into that voice, say, look, hey, you may not be a pro gun guy. You may not like guns. You may think they're scary. But no matter what, the reason I do what I do is because I believe that you have the right to choose how you protect your family. And whether that be, you want to have the security alarm and rely on the police versus you want your own arsenal to be able to defend yourself and you train every day and go to all the classes and schools you can, that is your right. Because when it comes down to it, you're going to protect, as like, this was a father, as the father of your family, you're going to do what you choose to do to protect your family. And I don't think that anyone should have a say in how you do that. And so you kind of bridge that gap saying like, hey, we're both dads, we have the responsibility and the urge to protect our family. And I think that no one should ever determine that for you. I think that is your choice. And you're free to make whatever choice you want. Kind of bridge the gap that way. And that immediately takes people kind of off their guard when you are saying, like, hey, man, this is something that I'm not fighting just for me. I don't think this is for you, whether or not you choose to use it. And I think that kind of stuff helps a lot when you're initially talking to people and all that. And I know, Mike, you've had about a million conversations with people from the huge range of the perspectives of pro and anti-gun, and I think you'll back me up when you know some people get immediately defensive, and you got to figure out a way to disarm that before you even get down to the nitty gritty on what your stance is on guns, or your stance is on Second Amendment in general. Uh, and I think trying to identify who you're dealing with is one of those big things. Because you can have individual discussions on specific policy arguments like assault weapon laws or assault weapon bans, universal background checks, all that kind of stuff. But before you get into that, you got to figure out, okay, who am I talking to and how can I bridge the gap? One of the other things I always talk about when I'm trying to really pull someone who's new to the whole idea of the Second Amendment or guns is, look, there is no doubt, there's no argument that when you have the right to bear arms, that there is going to be violence. That's not a bit debatable subject, whether it's justified violence, where self-defense uses, which are amazingly high, or it's bad, criminal violence. Violence will happen. But this is a policy choice that was considered when we wrote the Second Amendment. So when you're talking about the law, that takes that, the Second Amendment takes that off the table. When you're talking to people, you need to bring that in. So what I like to do is I say, hey, look, I know you think that guns are bad. They're, having guns around leads to death, leads to more violence. But the Bill of Rights in general are all dangerous, whether or not it's the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendment. These are all rights that quite literally make it more dangerous. And my example that I always give is everyone knows a cop in some, and go and ask your cop friends this question. Hey, if the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment didn't exist, so that's the right to remain silent, to right to counsel, the right not to be unlawfully searched and seized, right? So if those didn't exist, could you go and arrest all the bad guys tomorrow? And every cop will be like, yeah, I know. They know where the bad guys are. They know how to get to them. They can kick down that door, throw a guy on the ground, and arrest him. But we have rights in this country. We have the right to counsel. We have the right to unlawful search and seizure. So the cops can't just run into the bad guy's house without probable cause or a search warrant. And so these rights make everything more dangerous. The Second Amendment isn't unique when it comes to that, but no one's going to sit there and argue, well, we shouldn't have the First Amendment or we shouldn't have the Fourth Amendment. That no one debates that. You're never going to find someone who's like, you know what, I really think that police should just be able to walk into everyone's house, search the whole place whenever they want, and then arrest anyone who breaks the law. No one's going to agree to that. And that's the same thing when it comes to the Second Amendment. While we have these rights, yeah, things might be more dangerous in various ways, but these are things that we have to accept, and we have accepted with the Constitution. So I like to bring that in. Like, no one's going to argue against the Fourth Amendment right, not to be searched and seized, and and you can talk to the judges. They know the bad guys. There's countless examples of a true bad guy murderer getting off because his right to counsel was violated, or the police didn't execute a search warrant properly, or they didn't have probable cause. They found all the evidence. It's all there, but unfortunately, the fruit of the poisonous tree, if it was an unlawful search, none of that evidence can be admitted into court. So there are instances where the judicial system, the courts, everyone, we let murderers, rapists, bad guys off when everyone in the world knows they're guilty. And everyone in the world saw the evidence. But guess what? Because of our rights, that guy got off because his rights were violated. And that, may or may not be a bad thing, depending on who you talk to. But the fact is, those rights make it more dangerous. They resulted in that guy getting off. But the overall, use of these rights and the implementation of these rights, it's to protect, and it's to protect the rights of the people. And the same thing is for the Second Amendment. So that's I like to spread it out to where you're not talking about just the Second Amendment. This is an example of rights, and with rights comes, the risk, and that's just something you have to accept. Now the question is how we go about exercising our rights and what's the best way to do it. I lose you there, Mike? Can't hear you.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Keep going.
No,
I'm with you.
you're good. So that's a little bit of my rant, just as an example when you're talking just in general about these broad issues. But I like to go broad and then come into the specifics because too often what happens when people debate gun control or gun laws or the Second Amendment is you zoom in on a very specific issue before you can make you have any type of agreement on a broader issue. And the broader issue that I like to bring people in on is, hey, these are your rights, and your rights need to be protected, as opposed to don't touch my guns. Let's argue, about universal background checks or age restrictions and all that. If you go too quickly into those specific issues, I think you'll get bogged down into the weeds too quickly, and you end up just having a debate and not like a real conversation to bring someone into your way of thinking when it comes to exercising your right.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a goal too
Yeah.
when you come across somebody who maybe doesn't agree with you. What's your goal? And something more specific than, well, I'm trying to convince them that I'm right, or I'm trying to make them pro-gun or whatever. I think that quickly assessing a realistic goal, like maybe a realistic goal is just, making them a see a different angle, or maybe just convincing them that a particular definition is correct or something like that. Having some kind of goal in the conversation um, is important too, and listening leads to that. If you ask them a bunch of questions off the bat, rather than just launch right into, I'm going to tell you everything I know about Second Amendment and guns, and then they shut down, and you're done. But asking them a lot of questions like, well, what are your thoughts on this? Or how did you get to that conclusion? Or where do you normally get your information? Asking questions with the idea of, well, let's see what little thing I can do. I don't want to get a grand slam home run in the bottom of the ninth. Let me just see if I can get a couple of singles, get them on
Oh
base
yeah.
and move the ball forward. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's huge, and you really pinpointing kind of my rambling there in the sense that when you're talking to someone, you got to have that goal. My goal is generally to get them to start agreeing with the fact that we have these broad rights that need to be protected. I'm not talking about the Second Amendment
Yeah.
right now. We're just talking about all rights, and your rights are vitally important, and they should not be given up by any means. So bring them in like that, and then we can start narrowing down. Okay, now that we agree that we have these rights, that they are sacred, vitally important, and we can't just chuck them in the trash. Let's go down to that next step. Okay, now we can talk about Second Amendment, and again, asking questions is huge. Okay, so what is your thought on the Second Amendment? Like, where are you? Where do you stand on the Second Amendment? A lot of people be like, well, I understand, we have guns, and I get the purpose of guns, but I think that we need more gun laws to just rein in all the violence and murder that's going. And that's typically a response you'll get is I respect the fact people can have guns, but I think we need to have more controls. Okay, well, in your mind, what controls would be the preferred way of preserving the Second Amendment right, but implementing some control that you feel would work? And again, you'll get the universal background checks, assault weapon bans. Those are the big ones, and those are the big ones because they're commonly repeated in the media. They're repeated by the gun control advocates. So that's generally what you'll hear. And with the assault weapon laws. Okay, so yeah, you can start getting bogged down with, well, what is an assault weapon? Oh, it's an AR-15 and all that. But I like to kind of, again, go a little more broad. Okay, so you think an assault weapon ban would be beneficial. And now, why do you think an assault weapon ban would be beneficial? Oh, okay, well, there's been a mass shootings, or all the big shootings were done with AR-15s, and at that point, you can start bringing in some facts if you're aware of them. Whether the total number of deaths in a year due to a rifle, not just a semi-automatic rifle, or what some people would call an assault weapon, is vastly smaller than I think people getting killed with hammers or beaten to death or stabbed with knives. You can do that, but at the same time, you know, I would like to. I always say, like, hey, so what if we got rid of whatever you called an assault weapon? If the same violence occurred just with a different gun, would you want to ban that gun too, or would you stop at whatever you defined as an assault weapon at the time? A lot of times, like, oh, well, we'd probably ban that next gun and say, okay, well, if deaths continue to happen, would you ban a new definition? Well, yeah, and they'll slowly admit to it, and then you can bring up a great example of California. California was the first state to implement an assault weapon ban. The federal assault weapon ban was modeled after California's, and what we've seen since the first iteration of that ban is the moving of the goalposts. Assault weapons were originally defined by make and model. Well, they didn't like that because people still bought other guns that weren't make and model. So they then decided that an assault weapon wasn't a specific make and model of a gun, it was a gun with certain features. And so then that was the new definition of assault weapon. So, working in that definition, guns were sold that did not meet that definition. So California changed the assault weapon ban again to broaden and expand the definition uh, two or three times over now since then. And in fact, we brought the Miller case challenging the assault weapon ban literally in the middle of litigation while we're trying this case. They changed the definition of assault weapon again and broadened it while we were in court over the definitions of assault weapon. So, in those, that's, like, in my opinion, one of the better instances to show, like, look, the goalpost will move. So unless you're willing to just select, this is the line and it's not going to be moved, this isn't an argument that's ever going to end. It's just going to keep going, and we're going to be in the same position over and over again. So I don't feel that that is a proper proposal to justify infringing on the rights of hundreds of millions of people. That type of stuff where you can bring in real world examples, but not beat them over the head with it. Just show them that, hey, look, you can see that this definition will always change. And again, you can bring in the example of London and Europe and all that, where most guns are prohibited, if not extraordinarily restricted. And London, I think, has all this knife crime, and now they want to. We've seen all sorts of regulations when it comes to knives there, where you have people proposing blunting all knives, so you can't stab someone because it doesn't have a pointy end. To you can't have a knife in public unless it's in a bag with a receipt because you just bought it from the store. So I think, again, just a real world example of how, well, they didn't stop at getting rid of the guns because, again, unfortunately, bad guys do bad things. And if you magically take away the tool that they're using to hurt someone, they're just going to pick up the next tool. And unfortunately, that's just the repeated thing. The timeline of history proves that fact, that you can take something away, they're just going to grab the next thing. So the underlying cause of the problem, violence, which has all sorts of causes, isn't really going to be changed. And again, I think discussions of the fact, well, how do we really address these laws? And I'll switch over to another example. Safe storage laws are another one that comes up a lot. And I don't think you will find any gun owner or anti-gunner that will say that they don't think things should be stored safely. I mean, I'm a gun owner, Mike, you're a gun owner. Yeah, you should securely store your guns in a manner that works for you, so you can still be able to use them. But I'm a father of three. I have three boys, I'm not gonna leave my gun lying around loaded because I have kids. Now, I have other ways of securing those where they're easily accessible, but that's my choice. Now, the fact that San Diego passed a safe storage law where I'll get in trouble if my kid grabs my loaded gun and hurts himself or hurts another person, that's not I'm not deterred by that law. I don't think any parent is deterred by the fact that if I leave my gun around in an unsafe manner, or I'm not educating my kids, or they get that gun and hurt themselves, that's a deterrent. you know I don't want my kids to ever get hurt. I don't want them to ever hurt someone else. The fact that the city passed a gun storage law, that's not the deterrent effect. Now, you have people that are irresponsible. If the fact that your kid could get hurt because you don't store your gun safely isn't a deterrent enough, the fact that they passed the law that you're going to get a misdemeanor, maybe even a felony if they hurt someone else with a gun, that's not going to deter you either, because the fact is your own child's safety didn't deter you as a parent. So we have to understand that there are just some things that a law will not do. And, you know, the better way of doing it, it's not that I don't care about kids. And believe me, I've gotten that because one of our cases challenging the prohibition on under 21, people 18 to 20-year-old, they can't buy a gun. I've been accused of endangering kids, wanting, children to have firearms because of these lawsuits. When in fact, I just think, if you're going to go to war, and be sent halfway across the world as a part of the military as an 18-year-old, you should have the right to also uh, exercise your Second Amendment right at home. But so I've heard all these arguments, when it comes to the kid stuff, but the reality is different. And I think when you bring up the reality, it's like, hey, you're a dad, I'm a dad. Do you really think that either of us want our kids to ever be hurt accidentally or intentionally with a firearm? No, we can agree on that. Do you think that having a safe storage law is going to deter you more, or just the sheer fact that you don't want your children to be hurt is going to be the deterrent? And no one's going to argue with you on that. Like, preventing your kid from being hurt is the deterrent. It's not the law. So I think bringing in the real world examples like that is very helpful when you're trying to bridge that gap.
You
What do
know,
you think?
I'm not a big yes, absolutely agree. I'm not a big fan of when you're having the discussions with friends, family, coworkers. I'm not a big fan of going deep into terminology debates. You
Yeah,
know,
that's also
like
big.
I just don't think like let's say you spend the next 10 minutes convincing them that assault weapon isn't a real term.
Yeah,
Okay. Now they want to ban a semi-automatic rifle, like does that
yeah,
it's not any better. I don't think that changing the terminology or splitting the hair on terminology or pulling out well, actually, it's not called a what I don't think that's I think that that's something that's very useful in some instances, but not when you're at the dinner table or at the water cooler or having coffee or whatever. When you're sitting there talking to somebody and you really want to move the ball forward, I don't think you're moving the ball forward by making sure that they know the exact right terminology. It's not an assault weapon, it's a defensive sporting rifle, whatever. You're not doing it.
yeah.
You're not moving the ball forward in any way. I think concentrating more on figuring out how do they make a decision. They probably make a decision based on caring about people and about some sort of fairness. So hit on that.
Oh yeah,
Figure out like, hey, how can we change this person's fundamental understanding of why gun owners are so passionate about gun ownership, and do it in a way that isn't reliant on statistics and is reliant on something that resonates with them. Like if they're saying, "Geez, I really I just don't want people to die. That's why I want to ban all guns." Well, actually, firearms are something that protects more people than actually kills people, and talk about how, women are able to defend themselves more reliably, that sort of thing. Like figure out what motivates them and use that to open up a line of communication rather than preach to them what resonates with you. Well, it's in the Constitution. The Constitution is important. What if they don't care about the Constitution at all? And whether or not they call it a semi-automatic long gun or they call it an assault weapon, if they still want to ban it at the end of the day, then sitting there arguing over terminology hasn't moved the ball forward in any way.
Yeah, and an example kind of your line of thinking here is, you know, you always hear about the school shootings. Oh, we got to ban these guns because of school shootings, and we got to protect the kids. You know, the bridge is when you're talking to someone. Look, again, father of three, you're a parent. Do you really think that I want kids to be in danger? And
Well,
if you're having a conversation with someone honest, they'll be like, no, I don't think you want kids to be in danger. Okay. So we both agree we want to keep these kids safe in school. Now, the only question is how we do that. We differ on how we're going to do it. So no one's the bad guy in the sense of, oh, I want kids saved and you want them to die. Let's just get that off the table. And let's try to come to an agreement on what are the best ways to actually protect these kids. That's that first step. Be like, bridge that gap, come to an agreement, and not get bogged down with, well, there haven't been as many, school shootings with AR-15s or handguns. Handguns are mostly used. That's true, but that's not going to change that person's opinion. So I think that not getting bogged down and really trying to bridge that initial gap is big. And then you can start going on and be like, hey, look, we got, I think, what was the last number I saw? It was we have over like 450 million guns in this country. Um, you can say they're all banned tomorrow. Do you really think you're going to get rid of them? No. Okay. So the fact is, guns are here, whether you like it or not. Now, how can we, knowing that the guns are here, they're not going anywhere, how can we protect kids the most? And then you can start having that discussion on, what are the best ways to do that? How do we protect things in other areas of our society and that type of stuff? So I think that always is a big help, and again, not getting bogged down with the definitions and the nuance in that those technical nuances goes a long way. And not trying to make the person out as the enemy or someone that, hey, by the end of this conversation, I'm going to prove you wrong. It's let's have a good, honest conversation. I guess that would be that the transition to the next thing I really wanted to bring up is knowing who you're talking to. You also got to know when it's the time to walk away, because there will be people that you will talk to that it's not even worth trying to convince them. And again, the example is, well, you just want to kill kids when you're talking about the fact that an 18-year-old adult should be able to buy a firearm. You're really not gonna convince that person if they're vehemently yelling at you, saying that you're a murderer and you want kids to die. Uh, it's okay to just write that person off and not go down that road, because there are going to be instances where you will not convince them, and that is just an absolute fact. I think everyone who's ever talked to other people when it comes to the Second Amendment has come across at least one individual where it's a lost cause. So, and again, you'll probably find most of those online in any online discussion over Facebook or Reddit or anything like that. So sometimes it's okay to walk away and just know that, hey, it's not worth your time trying to convince someone who's just not gonna think logically, think rationally, and have a real conversation, an honest conversation with you. So you also got to know when to just walk away. And then there's going to be times where, yeah, you can completely disagree with someone in every way on this subject, but they're still willing to sit down and have an honest conversation. I went to UCLA. I have a lot of liberal friends that are not pro gun by any means. Um, and COVID was a great example of, when people started to get a little scared uh, with everything that was going on. I had a lot of friends that called me that were very against guns, but then they decided, like, hey, I know, you're the Second Amendment guy, you're my crazy gun nut friend. You know, I do want to, maybe get a gun to protect me and my family. Uh, and that's not the time to be like, like, now you understand. Is like, hey man, like, let's do this and work with them, and not to try to throw in their face. But I help people go and figure out how to buy their first gun, and then also talk to them about training and where to go and what to do, and give them a support system, which is one of the things that I love about San Diego County gun owners. You do the shooting events where you bring in new shooters, because it's a community, and it's scary for people, especially someone who may be coming from a more liberal side of things, where guns are scary, guns kill people. To hey, buying your first gun or going shooting for the first time, like, that's something you want to welcome them in, and support them in every way you can. And again, going back to the debates and talking about all this stuff, the honest approach to people is like, hey, uh, we disagree, but I'm not your enemy. You're not my enemy. I'm not this crazy gun nut that just wants to, go shoot up in the sky, ride it on my cowboy, or ride it on my horse all day long, and shooting people left and right. This is a real world thing where, it is my choice, my right to how I want to defend myself in every which way. And I think that does bring people into the conversation a lot more.
Well, that's leadership by example is, I think, extremely important. If they see somebody who is, safe and sane and trained and responsible, and that's who gets embedded, in their psyche as far as what is a gun owner. Like, well, gee, I know this guy, John Dillon, and every time he's around guns, he's extremely responsible, and he doesn't talk about taking over the government. And he talks about protecting his kids. And, I think leadership is one of the most important ways to influence people to come on your side. And you were talking about, kind of know when to walk away.
Mhm.
I think figuring out who's really on the fence and who's entrenched is probably that's going to save you a world of frustration.
Oh
If,
yeah.
if people are entrenched and they're just trying to convince you of their opinion, or they're trying to mess with you or troll you or whatever, just walk away. Just walk away from that person. Your blood pressure and your mental health will thank you.
Yes.
But the people who are on the fence, the people are like, yeah, I don't get it. I just don't understand why people will need an assault weapon. Okay, great. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about, why they might need an
Mhm.
assault weapon or what an assault weapon is. That's progress.
Oh yeah, totally. And it is crazy how uh, making just that choice alone, understanding when someone's entrenched and when someone's actually on the fence, that goes a long way in your progress in talking to people. And again, I say this, doing what I do, making these legal arguments and talking about the Second Amendment constantly. That's my career. Um, it's funny. I have seen and read every single argument that you can possibly fathom when it comes to, gun control, Second Amendment. And, I've had those late nights where I'm right until 2, 3 in the morning. I've been sitting there, making the arguments, contrary to the pro gun control side. And I've had to sit there to myself and think, like, hey, am I in the right spot here? Am I actually making the real argument, the right side of history, like they like to say? And I've questioned myself, and that's something I think that'll help any guy who wants to talk about Second Amendment rights, is to really force yourself to to apply these arguments that you're hearing to yourself, and really think on it and say, hey, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right way to go? Because it helps. And I'll tell you, I've never wrote an argument on paper in any court proceeding ever that I didn't actually 100% believe in, and that's one of the crazy things that in the work I do is, we read what these state attorney generals and lawyers write, and there are times where I cannot fathom how this individual is putting this on paper because there's no way in the world that they actually believe this. And it's something that I've struggled with, in the years of dealing with these state attorneys and all that. Eventually one day when these cases are over, I'll buy them a beer and be like, all right, did you really think that when you wrote it down on paper, or are you just toeing the line, doing what you're told? And either way, I just got to have the answer because I don't believe that they could possibly believe in what they write. I've believed in every single thing I've ever written down on paper, and if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't write it. And that's why, again, when I'm talking about these things, I don't question my position because I've never had to manipulate data or manipulate an argument to where it's favorable to me. It's just, hey, this is what it is, and yeah, I'll write that down. There's no problem there. But I think when you're talking to people and you're talking about the Second Amendment, be like, apply it to yourself. Be like, all right, do I really believe in what I'm saying here? And try to press yourself a little bit internally, uh, and see if you can play that devil's advocate in your own mind and maybe take on your buddy's position internally and see, hey, does it hold water? And that always is very helpful to me.
And there's one thing I want to touch on. I think when you should probably manage your own expectations.
Yeah.
I don't think that I don't think it's realistic to assume that in one conversation you're going to completely change somebody's mind.
No.
I think that you can, just like I said, hit some singles. You can move the ball forward a little tiny bit. You can maybe just kind of get them to think about something or maybe change their perception on something. But you're not going to be able to completely change someone who's anti-gun into someone who's pro-gun over a beer or a sandwich. It's just not realistic to think that. I did have, it was funny. I read, there's this guy I really like. He's an author. He was an NYU professor, and he's actually very left of center, but he did a bunch of studies that really changed political communications. A guy named Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. And he found out that the left typically what they base their political opinions on are two things: caring and fairness. And I thought, well, it can't be that simple. And I broke, this is years ago. This is 10, 12 years ago when I first came across this. And I broke my rule of not arguing with people online, although every once in a while I get suckered into it. And, next thing I know, I'm like, all right, I got to walk away. But 10, 12 years ago, there was a picture of a hunter and she was holding up a mountain lion that she'd harvested, and it looked like she was cuddling it, but she was
Mm-hmm.
holding it up to show perspective, to show how the size of this thing. And some random lady was all mad at her, about how horrible that was. And so I decided to approach her from a caring and fairness point of view. And I said, "Hey, it's not fair for you to judge her. This is her culture. She cares about this is something she does with her family, and she's grown up for generations doing. And and I of course explained the fact that hey, she's not cuddling this thing; she's showing perspective. But I really tried to show a caring and fairness perspective when I was talking to this woman, and lo and behold, she said, "Wow, I hadn't really thought of it that way. I certainly don't want to minimize somebody's culture or marginalize somebody's, experiences with their family and that sort of thing." Now, did I change that woman's mind on hunting? Not necessarily, but I don't think that that's a realistic goal. What is a realistic goal is to open up a line of communication, at least get some things across to the person you're talking to that they can kind of chew on and think about. I don't know. What's like, do you have an
Yeah.
example of like a time you've actually, you've changed someone's mind or you've made some progress in a conversation?
Yeah. Well, what you just said there remind me. This is more of a hunting example. I'll give you a more Second Amendment one, but there's a great clip of Steve Rinella. He's a renowned hunter and podcaster, all that. He has a Netflix show, but he did some sort of debate where a vegan activist kind of challenged him on killing deer and hunting and all that, and he very respectfully and nicely said, explained that, look, uh, I am for the idea of deer more than I am the individual deer, meaning the conservation efforts and the regulation surrounding deer hunting, has quite literally let deer flourish in the United States and elsewhere, and the money that is you know paid in to get the deer tags and all that has ensured that the survival of deer, and we have just vast amounts of deer in this country because of hunting. So the idea of deer is more important than that individual deer that gets hunted and consumed by that person. Same thing with kind of your cougar example. And again, I'll go back to that 5 minute ski lift ride where I just had an honest conversation with the dad next to me, where I didn't convince him on the Second Amendment. I didn't convince him on guns, but what I did convince him on, where he shook my hand, we got off the lift, we shook hands, have a nice day, was, look, your rights in general are something that need to be protected at all costs, and your ability to protect yourself and protect your kids that you're here with is up to you and no one else, because that is just the reality of the situation. And we agreed on that. And that's that
Yeah.
first step. Like,
Right. Like you said,
look, we're not going to
that's a
agree on guns. You're not going to go out and buy an AR after this and start going to your range.
that's a
But
reasonable result. Yeah.
yes. And if that guy was my buddy and we talked all the time, I'm sure eventually I'll convert him. And I have converted a number of friends and family over time. But it's yeah, you got to manage that expectation. So don't try to hit the home run like you keep saying. The singles are where it's at, because I guarantee you that guy thinks differently about it.
Well, I'll tell
Because
you, one of the like when I talk to other people that are in the industry or do a lot of activism for Second Amendment, it becomes less important to win these little arguments at the water cooler, because the things that you're doing in the world of activism are actually doing, some good. So like winning these petty little online Facebook arguments, or your coworker in the cubicle next to you almost kind of get to the point where it's like, who cares what that person thinks? Nobody. I'm actually doing some good here. I'm actually organizing people and getting people elected and raising money for a good cause. Who cares what that other person thinks? You know what I mean? The more successful you are and doing things that are effective. Okay, let me ask. Let's see. We got a couple of questions, or at least one question from the audience. Are there any? This is a good question. Are there any communities that focus on having and evolving these conversations that reach out to more folks on 2A to share resources, success, and failures, etc.? This is from gun websites in the YouTube chat. I from John, before you answer it really is, and thanks for the question. It really is a balance of, well, how much time do the San Diego County gun owners, for example, how much time does our organization want to spend organizing the people we agree with versus trying to convince those that we don't agree with to agree with us? It's kind of tough to, it's kind of a balance. I think that we spend more time organizing people who we agree with to do things to, get people elected, in a little bit more of a, maybe not a top down approach, but like a middle down and middle up approach. If we can get these folks elected into like these local offices, we think it'll help push our views up and push our views, down the ladder both. So I don't know if we spend an enormous amount of time convincing others or working on convincing others. It's more of a organizing those who do already agree with this. But anyway, I can't think of any organizations that do what he's asking, that communities that focus on having and evolving these conversations, that reach out to more folks on 2A. I can't quite, maybe I'm not understanding his question fully, but I can't think of anything.
No, yeah, I would agree with that. There's no organization whose main goal is, the outreach and those conversations that I can think of at least. The closest thing you see is, there's all sorts of YouTube channels, podcasts, all sorts where, they have those, long form discussions and, even man on the street type discussions that I think can be very helpful. But no organization where that's like their main thing. And I agree. As a 2A advocate organization, you do have to decide how much you're spending just trying to convert the individual every man that may be on the fence or even against you versus bringing the 2A community together. Because a great example, California, we have what 30 some odd million people in California, and the Newsom recall vote that happened was that I'm terrible with dates, and me and Mike always joke I'm not the biggest on the politics. I know law more than anything. Mike's my political guru here, but you know he won that recall vote by like 3 million, but I think a total of 9 million people voted or something along those lines. We have more than 9 million voter or gun owners in this state.
Yeah.
There's no question. And it's not just a guy who may be a liberal that has a gun. I guarantee you there are full on red blooded conservative gun owners. There's 9 million of us in this state. So what would have been more effective would be bringing that group together to vote out a governor who is as anti-gun as it gets, and frankly has just ruined the state in many ways outside of the Second Amendment. So I think that from an organizational standpoint, you got to draw that line, and I think it's really important we get people to come together and actually, take action.
Yeah. Okay, well, cool. John, how do people find you? What's your website in case they need you?
Yeah, it's dillonlodgegroup.com. My social media is California Firearms Lawyer or CA Firearms Lawyer on Instagram, Twitter, all that. You can give us a call. Email is jdillon@dillonlawgp.com. It goes directly to me. So if you have any gun related questions or issues, or you're dealing with the state of California in any way, or you feel like they're violating your right in some way, we'd be happy to take a look at it and see what we can do to help.
There you go. And go to gunownersradio.com and check us out every Sunday from 4 to 6, either on YouTube or, like I said, just go to gunownersradio.com for all the information. John, thanks so much for spending time. Appreciate all the work that